And as promised, we've got former select board member Neil Wishinsky on Brookline Interactive today, and we're going to talk about STRs. Neil, thanks for coming on the show. And what the heck is an STR?
Oh, an STR is another name for things like Airbnb, VRBO, where folks will rent a room for a night, 2 nights, perhaps as long as a month, in lieu of a hotel. I've done it. I've had good experiences. I've had mixed experiences. And in town right now, there's upwards of 300 or so STRs scattered throughout the town. Whether or not it's legal at this point is a point of contention, but they're here. They're here perhaps to stay, no matter what town meeting does, and they're a fact of life. And town meeting is being asked to weigh in and decide what under what conditions we want to permit it, if we do it all. And we have an interesting, complex debate before us, encompassing a number of different warrant articles that I'm sure we're going to get into.
So I want to unpack it a little bit slowly because even for town meeting members who have been following along, there are so many pieces. And as we discuss them sort of on email or in other forums haphazardly, it can get very confusing exactly what we're even talking about and what is under consideration. So I want to start with the status quo. And you mentioned they're here. That's certainly true. If you go to Airbnb and look up Brookline, you can find a place to stay tonight, right? But I understand it's not clear, or at least there are differing opinions about the legality. So I want to know, number one, what the policymakers or what the enforcers think is true today, and two, if there's any non-town meeting attempt to change that understanding.
Right. So currently, it's really the Wild West. The town has taken the position, and this is the building department who enforces the town building code and zoning code. The town has taken the position that Airbnbs are not permitted anywhere in town. And as a result, the Airbnbs have popped up, and there's been uneven complaint-generated enforcement of that really zoning provision of how you can use your house. Some folks like having Airbnbs next door to them. A neighbor of mine rents out their bedroom every now and then. I don't mind it. But then there are other situations where you might have, and there have been a number of situations where you have investors who buy an apartment, a condo, or even a 3-decker, and then rent out the apartment as an Airbnb and runs it as an investment. And those are the situations that have perhaps been more problematic than say an owner wanting a little extra cash and renting out a bedroom. And that's what we're trying to get our arms around. And there's a lawsuit right now where someone who's been running an STR is challenging the town's interpretation that STRs are not allowed anywhere in town. And if that lawsuit is successful, the town's determination that they're illegal would be reversed. But very interestingly, it would be reversed under zoning, and a court would be saying, yes, they're allowed. And then once you allow something in zoning, if it continues, it's called a pre-existing non-conforming condition that we would not have the ability to shut it down forever. It would be grandfathered forever. So the stakes in this thing are pretty high. We'll see where it goes.
Now, of course, when you say we, you mean the town. The
Town,
state
yes,
or
yes,
federal government could pass laws that would change course dramatically,
of course.
but there's no reason to think that that is forthcoming. So I know that it's not just like there's one warrant article, there's like four.
Right.
And why can't we just do this in a single warrant article?
Yeah, I wish we could, but when it comes to this kind of stuff, it's pretty complex, and we have to attack it in layers. So the first layer is, where are we going to allow STRs, and that's being done through zoning. So that's one warrant article. So a new zoning use is being created called short-term rentals, and under the proposed zoning, they're going to be allowed pretty much everywhere in town. And that's where the next series of warrant articles come in, and that's the warrant articles which regulate how STRs are going to be, how that business, it really is a business, is going to be conducted in Brookline. And there are two warrant articles that are competing proposals, but recently there's been a compromise amongst the various advocates, so that in the end, only one set of proposals is going to be considered by town meeting. And we can go through some of the key provisions once I'm done laying out the warrant articles. The third warrant article is one of penalties. What happens if a STR operator violates the law, and it sets up a series of fines and penalties? That piece has been less controversial and hasn't received a lot of public notice, but it's there, and it's important. It's the stick that the town needs to make sure that the STR operators are operating within the law.
So I would also add that many town meeting members know this, some may not, that the zoning changes require a 2/3 vote,
Right.
whereas the regulatory and penalties votes would only require a simple majority.
Right.
And that's another important distinction. And while housing choice is now the law, and some zoning changes now require a simple majority, this is not one of them. So that's a 2/3 vote. And that's another reason to have multiple articles. Before we get into the articles, I do think it's reasonable, and I'd ask you to, recognize that folks have different opinions about the severity of these things, but I think it would be helpful to kind of lay out from the perspective of an owner and from the perspective of a neighbor, what are the benefits or challenges associated with STRs? Right? What are the arguments? Why should we allow it at all? Why shouldn't we allow it anywhere, everywhere? Understanding, what people find attractive or troubling may help us figure that out.
So to understand that, we need to look a little of what are the different kinds of STRs out there. So the first is an owner who rents out a bedroom every now and then to make a little extra income, or to meet people. I think there are both motivations, and I think from that category of STRs, I think has been less controversial. There's an owner on premises, typically, though sometimes folks will rent out their home while they're away for the Cape for a week or something like that. Then there's the owner adjacent units. So there you have, let's say someone owns a 2-decker or 3-decker. They live upstairs. They rent out downstairs. There's so the owner is around, but the unit is devoted to STRs. The town, the committee that was looking at this looked at that situation and said, nah, we want to start slow. We're not going to permit that in this go round. And then there's the one that's probably, is most on people's minds is the investor owned, where you have an absentee owner or an owner who lives somewhere else, renting out an apartment, or I've heard anecdotes of someone will buy an apartment building, with 3, 4, 5 units, and then they rent out the whole apartment building. And what you have there is kind of a hotel in a residential neighborhood, and that to me is kind of breaking the covenant of a residential neighborhood. And a lot of people feel that way, and those perhaps are the most impactful. And none of the proposals that I've seen over the last couple of years include that kind of situation. What we don't know, what we don't have statistics on, is how many of the 300-ish STRs out there fall into that latter, very impactful category. But anecdotally, I think if any of these proposals go through, it'll put a bunch of those kinds of STRs out of business.
And we're going to get to that in a second, but I'm going to circle back and ask the question again. What are the advantages to me running an STR? What are the risks to me running an STR? And then what are the advantages to me if my neighbor has an STR? And what are the possible negative consequences to me if my neighbor has an STR? Obviously, people think about the noise, but maybe there's more to it than that, or some layers of complexity that are worth saying out loud.
Yeah, what are the benefits? Obviously, the biggest benefit is the money that an STR would generate. It's a source of income. And Brookline is an expensive place to live, so folks are looking to generate a little extra income. And not only is it an expensive place to live, it's also a desirable place. Our location is good, especially for properties that are near public transportation. Having a base, someone coming into town, having a base as close to Boston as some of our neighborhoods are is a great thing. And some visitors like to be in residential areas. I know when I travel, I don't always want to be in a downtown hotel district. I want to meet real people. And an STR provides that opportunity to get out into the neighborhoods. On the downside, for folks who live next door or adjacent, you're bringing in folks into a neighborhood you don't know, and there's going to be turnover. One of the, I'll call it, covenants of a residential neighborhood is, at least in my view, getting to, if not know your neighbors, know who you are. You can look out the window, you see, okay, there's a face I recognize. So it's bringing folks you may not recognize into the neighborhood. Then, of course, there's people coming, going, car doors slamming in the middle of the night, perhaps, which can be very unsettling. I'm not aware of any increase in crime. That hasn't been the complaint. The biggest complaint I've heard is noise, folks coming in into a neighborhood, car doors slamming at odd hours, and then in smaller, like 3-deckers and 4-unit apartment buildings, having folks in a building going up and down the stairs who other folks in that building don't know, and that's been a source of complaints.
Yeah, and I'm going to add a couple
Yep.
on both sides of the ledger. Obviously, if I have an STR, right, that extra revenue is helpful. But actually, if my neighbor has an STR, the additional hotel tax revenue to my town
yes.
is helpful.
Yes.
And the additional customer to the restaurant is helpful.
Yes,
When people
of course.
travel, they tend to dine out a lot more than most families do. And so to the extent we're thinking about tourism, arts, and culture, visitors tend to spend more dollars per day on the Puppet Show Place Theater and the Coolidge Corner Theater and the restaurant than most residents do. So there's a bit of a benefit there too. How much? I don't know. I'm not claiming it's large or it's small, but it exists.
Yeah, I'll tell you that in fiscal year 2020, and this is the fiscal year that ended last June. So this is pre-pandemic. Actually, I shouldn't say pre-pandemic. It included a quarter, 3 months, 3 to 4 months of the pandemic. The town realized a bit over $400,000 from STR room taxes. So it's not a terribly large amount of money, but it's, that's what,
it's a couple of school teachers.
Yeah, five
right?
school teachers.
It's a team of firefighters. It's something.
Right.
And then on the negative side, you mentioned the smaller condos, right? The 3-deckers, the 4 units. One thing I want to sort of say out loud that you might not realize unless you lived in one of these spaces is in a building that small, people tend to use the common space differently than in a large building. In a large apartment building, you don't leave your stuff in the hallway or in the stairwell. But in a small building, that's where the kids' bikes go. And that's where your muddy boots go. And like your stuff. And because you know your 2 or 3 neighbors, like everybody's very respectful of each other's stuff, or they try to be. And that feeling really does change if there are new people trumping up and down the stairs every couple of days. And I think it sounds like a small thing, but I think it's real. And I do wonder what people who feel a little more vulnerable to strangers who are larger than them, often women, not always, right? I wonder how they feel. I think it's an important consideration. Yes. There's obviously a range of feelings on this, and we can't let any one preconceived idea dominate, but I think it's fair to think about that. But I think we only got about 10 minutes left, and I want to get into what we're actually voting on. So can you lay out for us the Warren, Dempsey, and Friends compromise of compromises, and kind of give us a feel for what we would be permitting and what we would not be permitting should all the yes votes follow?
Okay, so the committee that put together the proposal has put forward really a go slow and carefully proposal. The major provisions are, first, a short-term rental must be in the operator's primary residence. So the notion of investor-owned STRs is going away if this passes. If it's in a condo, and this actually was probably the most contentious point. If it's in a condo, the condo association must certify that the documents that govern the condo expressly permit the short-term rental, and that's going to be a major break on these going into especially small condos like you described, where folks will be leaving their stuff out in the halls. Owner adjacent units will not be allowed. There's going to be a maximum number of occupants, and the number is basically the number of bedrooms multiplied by 2, with a maximum of 8 under the proposal. You cannot rent it for more than 90 days in a year, and no more than 27 days in a month. And that 27 days was a tricky little number, because rentals for more than a month come under different rules. They're long-term rentals, which are subject to landlord-tenant law, which these are not. Very importantly, the units must be inspected by the town, and must meet the fire code, and must have a hardwired smoke detector. And that too, I've been telling folks, well, that provision is kind of a sleeper in that, especially in older homes, older homes are not built with hardwired fire smoke detectors. And that's not a cheap item to put in, but I think it's a very important safety item, especially when you're having people in your homes who are not familiar with the surroundings. They may, if something is going wrong, if there's a fire, they need perhaps a little extra time to figure out how to get out of there. And then operators must have, in order to operate, they must have a certificate of registration. And if they don't have that, they just cannot operate. And you must meet all of the requirements before the town issues the certificate of registration. And those are the basic provisions. And there's various provisions on, what happens if you violate the law. You can have your certificate revoked. Maximum and then violations are are reported to the town. There's a list of STRs and some administrative items. So I think that's kind of the basic outline.
Yeah, there's a lot to that. You mentioned inspections, specifically fire inspection. Are there health department inspection as well? I don't know the answer to this.
Yeah, yes, there is, though it's not, there's no detail of that in the bylaw. So,
but still, there's I will say there are quite a few steps one must take, even if you want to have an STR just that one time, right? So in fact, these sets of regulations, seems to me, will make it incredibly unlikely that someone will offer an STR legally once or twice a year, because
right.
It's just a lot of overhead to get there. If you're going to do it, you're going to do it because something about your lifestyle makes sense with STRs for something closer to 90 days per year, whatever that means, right? And that's just I think you're right. It's a natural consequence of us being small c conservative, both because of this problem with pre-existing non-conforming, and also because whatever we do, it's hard to get the genie back in the bottle.
Right, and that's actually, there's a balancing act. How hard do you make it? And if you make it too hard, this law will be observed perhaps in the breach, and we don't want that. And have we achieved with this proposal that balance? I don't know. I guess we're going to find out. But I think the sentiment, the general sentiment, was to start small and see how it goes, and broaden it if we're so inclined as time goes on. Though given the controversy, I think it's going to be a while before we revisit this. So I
suspect that what we do in town meeting is going to be with us for the 2020s. It's hard to bring this back up, to tweak it a little bit, and a big change feels really scary. So I feel like maybe what we do is what we get. Neil, thank you so much for coming on Brookline Interactive and helping us think through. This is a heavy topic. There's a lot of concerns, all of which I believe come from an honest place, but may not be concerns about things that are likely to actually happen. Nevertheless, this is what we do with our local democracy, right? We really try to think through all of these complexities. Half of the town rents. More than half of the town lives in multifamily housing of some sort or another. None of the town streets are allowed to be parked on overnight unless you've got a handicap permit, right? So this gets complicated in lots of interesting ways. Thank you. I also want to thank, I'm going to do it off the top of my head, I'm sure I'll miss somebody, right? Paula Friedman and Sean Lynn Jones and Chris Dempsey and Paul Warren Christina
Albuquerque. Yeah.
I'm sure there are others who really put a lot of time into this and, tried to think through all of the permutations and tried to find that balance, knowing that, if we overregulate, we'll get nothing. Town meeting will vote it down. If we underregulate, we'll get nothing. Town meeting will vote it down. And finding that, just right is not so easy under normal times. Under COVID times, I think it's much more difficult.
Yep.
And so congratulations to them, whether or not it passes, congratulations to them for putting together a package that folks who came in with very different perspectives could all live with. I know also Jonathan, Karen, and Linda Pelkey have worked on this. They've got some amendments and some other ideas they've been working on. Thank you to them for their efforts as well. And thanks to Brookline Interactive for letting us talk about this on their TV show.
Yep.
Okay. All right, Neil. Well, I will see you online tonight for the first night, the second night of town meeting. I will have seen you last night for the first night. And, we're having fun.
Yep.
Great to be here. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Neil.
Okay. Thank you, Tommy.